want to talk about diabetes today. This information is just physiology. I'm surprised it's not all over the place. But the more and more people I meet who are diabetic, the more I talk about this, the fewer people seem to have heard about it. So I wanted to kind of run through the physiology real quick. It'll take maybe a minute or two to get it through, but it's kind of important that we understand how it works. So everything starts with diabetes and all this with production of energy. The energy we're talking about is ATP. So ATP is the chemical that runs everything in the body. When you talk about energy, your heart, your brain, your gut, all that is highly dependent upon ATP. So when we're creating ATP, we have a couple different ways we can make it. When we're talking about diabetes, we're using the sugar system. So what ends up happening is you consume a food, that food becomes sugar, goes in your blood, and then your blood has to push that into the body. So remember, ATP is created in the mitochondria, and there's the powerhouse of the cells, if you guys remember that from high school. And the mitochondria live in the muscle tissue. That's important, remember that for later. So what ends up happening in the sugar system is when we eat the things and it becomes sugar to the system, the body has to push that sugar into the tissues to get it to work. The way it pushes it into the tissues is it uses insulin. Insulin will then allow the sugar to move from the blood into the tissues, those tissues being fat, which is how you gain fat, and the musculature, which is how you make the energy. Because remember, the mitochondria live in the muscles. See, it's later. That's why it's important to know, because if we can't get it into the muscle tissues, we can't get the energy. That issue creates all sorts of other problems that we see later, heart attacks, strokes, all sorts of stuff. So what we want to do is we realize that the sugar system is now broken because we can't get insulin through it, because what happens is that as you start having more and more and more insulin, what ends up happening is the receptors that listen to insulin and push things through stop working. And so that's what we get when we talk about insulin resistance. It's an easy way to track if you pull your insulin levels. However, so we can't get the sugar from the blood into the tissue because the insulin pump doesn't work. Well, the easiest way to fix this is to recognize we still have to have ATP. And so the way we're going to do it is, instead of using the sugar system, we'll use the other system, which is the fat system, because we can make ATP in the mitochondria with either sugar and insulin or fat. And so the way that we move from the sugar system to the fat system, that's a keto diet. That's all it is. So you're using fat as your major fuel source now. That's also why people who are on the keto diet lose fat so much, because your body's burning that fat or oxidizing that fat to make ATP. So if you'll move from the sugar system, the glucose system, to the keto system or the fat system, and you leave yourself there for 3 or 4 months, what ends up happening is, because you're producing a lot less insulin, because you're not processing sugar anymore, your body starts to get reset. And so all those insulin receptors that weren't working before, now they will work. And so give yourself 3 or 4 months, and then you can walk yourself back in to normal carbohydrate function, and you're fine. So that's the big key. If you're diabetic and you don't want to be diabetic, go on a keto diet for 3 or 4 months, walk yourself back out, everything's fine. And the other good thing about learning about keto diets and diabetes is that even if you're not going to go keto, the knowledge of glycemic index, glycemic load, that type of thing will really, really help your diabetic function anyway. So if you start choosing lower glycemic foods and you're diabetic, your blood sugars will start to come down, everything becomes more manageable. So, look at the glycemic index, which is how quickly things turn to sugar. There's a lot of foods that you guys think are really healthy that aren't. Here's the biggest piece of that, though. There isn't a healthy diet for people. There's a healthy diet for a person. So, for instance, a lot of people shouldn't be eating rice. White rice, brown rice, jasmine rice, doesn't matter. The glycemic level of that is higher than Coca-Cola. So if you're looking at when things turn to sugar and how bad sugar is for you, it can be worse than Coca-Cola for a lot of you guys. So keep that in mind. Oatmeal or oats are also just as bad. The glycemic index of those is very, very high. So if you'll look those up, just Google GI of whatever food, GI of oats, it'll come up. GI of donut, it'll come up. GI of broccoli, it'll come up. The lower the GI, the slower it takes for those things to turn to sugar in your blood. And so the smaller the insulin response you get. So that's kind of the whole crux of what we've been talking about the past couple of days. Every single time I have taken a diabetic, type 2 diabetic, and worked them into a keto diet, about 3 or 4 days out into the diet, they're no longer diabetic. And what I mean by that is that they're producing energy without the use of insulin. And so all of a sudden, their chemistry is fine. So that's what we talk about. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer to get them in there than others because you got to clean some stuff up, but that's the thrust of it. So if you're diabetic, if you have a friend who's diabetic, then look at moving into a ketotic state. Now, there's a lot of misinformation about this, I think on purpose. The thing is that it's not hard to sustain. The only thing that I can't have in this diet is French fries. And I eat a lot of cheesecake. I eat a lot of pecan pie, brownies, pizza, all sorts of stuff. Like my diet right now, I'm trying to cut and lose fat, is 2 pizzas, blueberry cheesecake, and pecan pie. But it's all keto. We don't use any sugar, and we don't use any of the things that turn into sugar. So it's a lot easier to do than you think it is. So that's kind of the crux of the whole thing. And a lot of stuff is like this. You know, if you look at MS, if you look at dementia, if you look at ulcerative colitis, there's a lot of things that if you just go back to the physiology aren't that hard to heal. And just like diabetes, if you understand the physiology and you start using the physiology, maybe you don't need to use the drugs as much. But maybe that's why you don't know the physiology. It's pretty simple. Like a lot of things we talked about just a second ago, ATP, mitochondria, we learned about those in high school. The thing is that you probably didn't learn about the 2 different systems, the fat system and the carbohydrate system or the sugar system. If one of the systems is broken, stop using it. Use the other one. It's really not that hard. Now, here's the other issue we get into with this. Just like gasoline engines and diesel engines both make cars move, the problem is that they're totally different operating systems, different chemistry, different everything else. So the thing we got to recognize is that you have to have somebody who understands the blood function and understands when you pull your blood what they're supposed to be looking at. Most doctors don't, because they just understand if this is levels high, I give this med. So there's a lot of things, creatinine, ALT, AST, things like that, BUN, a lot of those things are going to be, cholesterol, for example, are going to be a little bit different. And if you're in a ketotic or a fat oxidizing state. So this is a big piece for your starting part of health. Lots of times when I work on things like dementia or cancer or anything else, the first thing I have to do is fix their diabetes. Otherwise, we can't get anything else to heal for a variety of reasons. You know, reactive oxidative stress, low oxygen, low ATP function. And that's a big piece of it. So if you guys will start looking at glycemic function, if you start leading into a little bit more into ketosis, it'll start helping a lot of your guys' diabetes. And it's not going to fix everybody every time, but physiologically, it should help the vast majority of you. And if only if it helps 50% of the diabetics, there you go. But remember, you got to stay actually down in that real low point. Even if you're in really low glycemic function, but you're still in that sugar-fed state, the lower the glycemic piece, the better your body's going to do with it. So try as hard as you can to get down low, eliminate all your sugars, as many carbs as you can that are not fiber, and that's the easiest way to get into it. If you guys are going to do the carnivore diet, that's a great way to do it because there's no carbohydrates in meat. And the carnivore diets, people are like, well, that's super restrictive. You know how many things are on the carnivore diet? It's a giant amount of things. So, you know, a lot of times it seems to me that people are just saying that keto is unsustainable because they're trying to sell you their diet plans or because they just don't, you know, they don't know how to make food themselves. I have no idea what it is. It's a giant plethora of foods you can eat. It's amazing. It's delicious. But try it out. If you're diabetic or you have a friend who's diabetic, try to get them into a more fat-based diet, a more keto-based diet, and it'll help them out quite a bit. So it'll also help reduce the amount of drugs people need, and that's always a beneficial thing. So if you guys have any questions, send it to us. Check it out. Look at the physiology. I didn't go too deep into it because that always bores people when we get into the Krebs cycle and the TCA cycle. People who've been through biochemistry get panic attacks. So, but it's really simple. You guys just walk it through, you know, lipolysis versus glycolysis. You can research that all you want to, and you'll figure out how the whole thing works. So go through that. That's the easiest way to knock it out. I'll see you guys today at 2:30. We'll do a little bit more of check-in stuff. And then next week, we're going to go through everything. And then on Fridays, we're going to start doing Q&As, and we're going to start doing recaps. So if you guys have any questions at Chalmers Wellness, or toss them in the comments. Share this with whoever you can because it's probably going to help somebody. You guys have a good one. Thanks.